Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with aBlogtoWatch. Today I'm going to talk about Casio G-Shock MRG. MRG is the high-end luxury family of watches that exists at the very top end of the G-Shock ladder. These are designed and manufactured in Japan. These represent the highest level of quality and craftsmanship and technology that Casio has developed at any given point. And I'm going to use two different watches here to discuss MRG in general, talk a little bit about the history of Casio MRG, my experience with it, and the evolving feeling and I would say perception towards MRG that the watch collector community has over the years, especially now in 2026 as I'm recording this video. I know a lot about Casio. I wrote a book about the Casio G-Shock for the 40th anniversary of the G-Shock. I've been to Japan a few times and visited the various places where Casio produces watches. And overall, I would say that I'm someone who's really sort of understood Casio for a number of years. I started wearing G-Shocks in the 1980s, just a few years after they originally came out in 1983. And I'm a pretty big expert on G-Shock. But I have to say, I was skeptical of MRG for many years. It was not my favorite thing that Casio was producing. I didn't quite get it. I thought it was sort of a just because they wanted to have an expensive thing. But they've really made MRG something special in my opinion, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why I like these two watches. Now, I'll go into the details of each of these. Both of these have a full review on the aBlogtoWatch.com website where you can read all about the tech specs and background and what I think about them in particular, especially all the features and the dimensions and things like that. There's a lot of details about these watches. So there are full reviews of each of these respective Casio G-Shock MRGs on the aBlogtoWatch website. But this video is really about MRG in general. There's various different things that MRG stands for. I guess the common thing is Mr. G, like a high-end, more elite version of G-Shock. And the origin of Mr. G starts in the late 1980s. It might have been 1989 that the first MRG came out, maybe a couple of years later. And the goal was really about metal. The G-Shock watch, especially the first one from 1983 and then for a few years, was a resin plastic body. And if you were into watches, you wanted something a little bit more high-end feeling. There's a lot of reason for those resin bodies, and from a shock resistance and durability perspective, as well as cost. That is an amazing material. It really, really is. But if you're into watches and you're a collector or you're sort of a nerd or you're maybe someone that works at Casio in the engineering department and just want to see how far you can push the envelope with this, shock resistance, durability package, making a metal version is something really impressive. And this watch in particular isn't just a metal G-Shock, it's an all analog G-Shock. There's no digital dial here of any kind, and this one is an all digital one. I believe the first MRG watch to be released was a digital one. Then the Casio engineering team was like, you know what, we really want this to be an analog thing. The perception was that watches with hands were a little bit more classic, high-end looking, maybe attractive, and I agree. In a lot of ways, a watch with a physical dial, meaning hour indicators and hands, is going to be a little bit more attractive in general than something with a digital face, though I do love digital watches. So I guess from an aesthetics perspective, yes, a all analog dial wins, and you can understand why the Casio engineering team said, let's make an analog G-Shock, and there's a bunch of them. This particular one, which I'm holding, which is the Casio G-Shock MRG B2100, the specific version is the MRG B2100B-1A, this represents a scaled back design. Casio actually wasn't sure if this was going to work. Yes, it has this other subdial here, this asymmetric one, and a date window, but this is about as basic of a dial as an MRG has ever been. And I love it for that reason, but it was not supposed to work. This was supposed to be kind of a dud. And so far, I think that Casio has made 3 different cosmetic versions of this. So that means it's done pretty well. I love this watch specifically because it has that trendy look, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in detail. This one is an all analog one. This is the Casio G-Shock MRG B5000, specifically the MRG B5000 HT-1. HT stands for hammer tone, And that's actually what you have here. You have small hammering, which is a texture over this. Now, both of these watches are titanium, but not just standard titanium. I think the materials are a little bit different depending on exactly what Casio is going for here. Both of these are essentially a combination of titanium DLC coating. This MRG B2100 has a bezel that's made out of something called Cobarion, which is supposed to be this very hard, durable material. The entire case and bracelet have a DLC diamond-like coating, which makes it even harder, more scratch resistant. I've worn these watches a lot. And I'm not going to pretend that any watch is bulletproof. But these watches have put up with a lot. And I have to say, I have yet to find a spot or anything significant on either of them. This watch right here, the hammer toning means that someone had to pound this hammer. So I don't think they could hammer this metal. So I don't think this titanium is exactly the same. Casio claims that this is a DAT55G titanium alloy, also with a DLC coating, but you can see slight differences. This is a little bit more matte brushed. This is a little bit more polished. This has that octagonal bezel, the B2100 case, which is very, very popular. Obviously, the Royal Oak from Audemars Piguet has the octagonal bezel. And there's just a lot of watches that have this octagonal bezel. And the 2100 profile is one that Casio has all the way into its entry level. You can spend about $100, $120 maybe on some of the basic 2100 G-Shock models, all the way up to the MRG B2100. So you can really take it from something very fashionable and basic to something very, very high-end. Okay, so what is MRG all about? How does Casio justify a much more expensive G-Shock? Well, it's really about the craftsmanship. The reality is it's not that these watches do more than the less expensive G-Shocks. The idea is that they're meant to do the exact same, but only in a nicer package. For example, the shock resistance, the water resistance. The MRGs are supposed to have more or less the same durability as your standard G-Shock, but using a whole set of different materials. Both of these watches are water resistant to 200 meters. Both of these watches are extremely resistant to being dropped, to shock, G-forces, vibration. These are sport watches, but they're meant to be, nicer looking, a little bit more dressy, a little bit more formal. But these are absolute sport watches, sapphire crystals, of course. So the idea here isn't that these do more than your standard G-Shock. It's that they do exactly the same in a nicer package. The MRG case and profile, while some of the watches look a little bit different than your standard Casios, what I like about these is they actually very easily are mistaken for maybe not your basic G-Shock, but something that isn't that expensive. Most people who aren't familiar with MRG, when asked what these cost, maybe say a few $100s, but the reality is these are expensive watches. One of them is over $5,000, one of them is $8,000. That's not cheap. So is it just these materials and the positioning that makes the MRG so much more expensive? No. The cases are actually constructed from a lot more parts. There's dozens of parts that go into this. Each individual little sort of link or button here on the bracelet. There are actual layers here. So the bezel would have this top piece, this under piece. Everything here is individual. And your standard G-Shock has more stamped molded parts. The bracelet links may look intricate, but it's sort of one solid piece of metal. And when you look at the MRGs close up, you recognize that like a model in higher resolution, the parts are more precisely cut. There's, again, more individual ones rather than shaped parts. They're all like a complicated puzzle put together. And so what you're paying for is craftsmanship. I've been to the factory in Japan where Casio puts together these high-end G-Shocks and other high-end watches. They have the Oceanus, for example, and some of the Master G watches that are assembled in Japan. It's a beautiful facility. You wouldn't know that you weren't in a place that was making very high-end things, maybe high-end computer equipment or other watches or G-Shocks. So it's pretty incredible. Both of these watches, while they have different modules, this watch, which is the B5000, has Casio's 3541 module. This watch, the MRG B2100, Casio's 5718 module. But both of these movements have a lot in common. They're both powered by light. So this one around the digital dial has a photovoltaic cell. On the 2100 style, the light goes through the dial to a photovoltaic cell. Both of them are, I think they have the atomic clock control, but most importantly, Bluetooth. If you use the Casio, I think it's the Connect app or whatever their current app is for your smartphone, you can connect both of these watches to it to update the time, the date, make various settings on it. For example, on the digital face, if you want to set the timer or set up some of the alarms, you can do that through the app and not have to fiddle with the buttons. Both the watches have backlights, so you can see them in dark. Of course, the analog dial B2100 also has luminous material. So these are very full-featured timepieces with just a lot going on. So you can dive with them, or you can go to sort of an elite environment. You can get away with these looking very modest because they don't scream high luxury. But if you're an enthusiast setting, people are going to know what the MRG is all about. I want to show you an interesting feature that every MRG I've seen has, and it's a lock. So not all, but pretty much every MRG watch is on a bracelet, and even those that are on a strap have a buckle. And there's a little lock right here. When you close it, the pushers don't work. You can't open up the bracelet at all. So Casio calls it a safety lock. I usually never close it because you already have to push these. Maybe it means that someone can't steal your watch, but it's sort of this almost little gimmicky thing that every one of these has, every one of the MRGs has, which is kind of cute. It's a fun little signature. Here it is on the 2100 style, the little lock there. I've been wearing the digital one, the B5000 HT, the entire time. And here you can see the analog dialed MRG B2100. Neither of these is a clear winner. I mean, retail price is different because of the hammer tone, but the analog one actually costs a little bit more than the digital one without the very special version. I think this is a handsome timepiece. It's very, very comfortable. The titanium, or the basically titanium construction of both these watches makes them light. This watch in particular, the B5000, which, G-Shock makes a bunch of versions of this, as well as other titanium ones. But I have this watch in steel, and in steel on the bracelet, it is a heavy, heavy timepiece. When you pick up the MRG version and you feel just how amazing it is in titanium and how nice it looks and how lightweight it is, it's excellent. You can spend several $1,000s less and still get a titanium version of this that has a Bluetooth movement. So that's true. You're really paying for just a little bit of extra detail and luxury with the MRG B5000, at least right now. That is definitely true. Maybe they'll come out with the MIP screen, that's the memory and pixel screen, that is slowly being rolled out in the future. But right now, this is sort of top of the ladder for a digital MRG from the Casio MRG collection. This is where much of the evolution is. Things like the B2100 and the analog dials. This is where a lot of the sales success comes in. So you're probably going to see a lot more effort from Casio bolstering the fashion-forward side of the MRG collection with analog dials. So I think this was a surprise hit for them. The Casio MRG B5000 was also not supposed to do well because it was all digital. You had a situation for many years where Casio was trying to make the MRG as analog as possible. It's true that I think the very first MRG was digital, but they tried to abandon that as quickly as possible. I don't know exactly what led them to come back to an all-digital MRG, but they probably said to themselves, yes, but it's not that different than the other amazing G-Shocks we make. Why would people be into it? And to a degree, I can understand that, but if you are an enthusiast that wants the absolute top quality, there's definitely a lot of benefits in this. Is it several $1,000s more? I don't know, but that's the luxury watch industry. So this has been my Ariel Adams video on what Casio G-Shock MRG is, why I've come to really enjoy it. It's not the type of thing where you immediately have to go spend the money on it to get the best that Casio offers. When it comes to features and durability and value for money, I probably would recommend something else in the G-Shock collection first. There's a lot of the same stuff. But if you are a luxury watch enthusiast and you feel that your standard G-Shock is maybe a little bit boring or a little basic, never boring. That's wrong. Your G-Shock is never boring, but it's not necessarily going to be high end. If it doesn't feel rich enough for you, Casio has you covered with MRG, and there's definitely some very special things here. Price for this Casio G-Shock MRG B2100B 1A, $5,300, and you can see the full aBlogtoWatch review on the website. And price for the Casio G-Shock MRG B5000 AT-1 is $8,000. Quite a lot of money because of this hammer tone. It's a few $1,000s less in styles without it, but absolute coolest one. And you can also see the full review on the aBlogtoWatch.com website, and you can learn more on the Casio website. Thank you so much, and let me know what you think about these watches in the comments.